we have to remember the fact that a tragedy that took place here in the United States shouldn't put down our foot and be like, this is what Islam is exactly. Because I'm an American Muslim. I grew up here. I don't consider myself, I'm not a terrorist, or I'm not violent. I mean, I'm the total opposite. I'm an international studies major. I live in Connecticut. I go to Fairfield University, and my minor is in peace and justice. And there's many who are doing the same.
Mecca sits in the western mountains of Saudi Arabia, in a sanctuary roughly 100 miles square. Since long before Islam, it has been considered sacred territory, where no one could hunt, cut trees, or fight. At the heart of the city is a great mosque called Al-Masjid Al-Haram, and at its center is the Kaaba.
All religious faiths have a center. This is probably an essential part of the religious mentality, of human spirituality. In Islam, that center is there in the city of Mecca, centered on the house towards which all Muslims pray.
Muslims don't worship the Kaaba. They worship what it represents, the one God. Beneath its cover, the Kaaba is a simple stone building that stands 50 feet high. Inside its golden doors is an unadorned room. According to one Muslim tradition, the Kaaba was built by Adam, based on a cosmic plan handed down from God, and then rebuilt by Abraham after the Great Flood. On its southeast corner, framed in silver, rests something called the Black Stone. Some believe that it fell from the heavens and that it was one of the building stones used by Abraham. Many pilgrims try to touch or kiss the stone, but most would be happy to simply lay eyes upon the Kaaba.
And in my opinion, the world has a misconception of what Islam really is because of the media. I think that the media kind of perverts a lot of the stories that are happening, and there are a lot of things going on in the world that are not covered in the news media. You turn on the TV and you see a few local murders or some tragic stories, and then you see what happens in Iraq and Afghanistan or the war on terror. But the reality is that there are genocides going on. There are people dying and starving all over the world. There are terrorists who are not Muslim at all, terrorists of every faith. And if you really did look into what's going on in the world right now, you would realize that what the media puts out there is not a reflection of what's really going on in the world.
I'm trying to create understanding about Islam for non-Muslims here in America. What I was really looking for, and I got a lot of examples of this, were pieces of the Quran that I could use to show that Islam is peaceful. Because people who don't know the Quran will take little pieces of it or will interpret it differently to mean something hateful about Islam.
Muslims come from every country in the world and speak every language in the world. Only about 15% of Muslims are Arabs, and of course not all Arabs are Muslims. The largest percentage of Muslims actually live in Asia, and Muslim minorities thrive in the West, in the United States, in Europe, and in Latin America.
You have been given, as a woman, you have been given the honor to carry the flag of your religion. That's how like important the importance of hijab is. You know, like we carry like as a woman, because when we wear the hijab, we're known. There, she's Muslim. That woman walking across the street, or that girl walking across campus, she's Muslim. She's covered up. And I think that's a sign right there.
The headscarf, the hijab, which of course I wear, has been used as a symbol of women's oppression for hundreds of years, and you can actually track this symbol throughout European writings. It's thought of as a symbol of women's inferiority. But Muslim women who are educated and empowered, in many cases professionals, view it very differently. They'll tell you that what it does for them is takes the emphasis away from their exterior and focuses it on their interior, on their mind, on their intellect, on their heart. It's a way for women to be judged on who they are and not what they look like.
Well, when I was 14, I was actually, when I lived in California, in San Diego, I was attacked by a motorcyclist. And when I was walking back from my best friend's house with my 1-year-old brother, this motorcyclist passed by me and he goes, "You effing Muslim girl." And I mean, he considered me Muslim because of my hijab. And I remember like my heart was racing, and I was like, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? I was only like 300 feet away from home, and it was like I could see it. My house was right there, but I was too afraid to walk forward because he was right in front of me. And I decided that by the time I crossed the street, and by the time he's able to even make a U-turn, I can cross the street and go back to my best friend's house.
What we are finding in a lot of places like in Turkey, it's a statement of identity that the youth are using as, in a kind of self-assertive way, that youth have always made statements about their identity. And in other words, it has, maybe on some level, has a religious component to it, but it is also a way of re-expressing a kind of traditional identity that they're taking pride in.
At the same time, though, Muslim women also saw their faith as playing an important part in both their personal as well as their public life. They said that Islam is an important part of their daily life. They said that attachment to their spiritual and moral values was essential to their progress. So we asked women around the world whether or not they wear the hijab, which is what it's called, and why. Well, we found that women who do wear the hijab, the most predominant reason for wearing it is because they believe that it's a religious mandate. It's simple as that. So in 2002, we asked Americans how much they would say they knew about the beliefs and views of Muslims. 54% of Americans said they didn't know much or nothing. Now, this isn't surprising because before 9/11, Muslim wasn't even a word you heard very often in the news. And so it's natural to assume that the majority of Americans say they don't know a lot. Now, we asked the same question several years later, after the invasion of Iraq, of course, the ongoing war in Afghanistan, and a sharp increase in the coverage of Muslims and Islam on television. And this time, 57% said they knew virtually nothing.
During the aftermath of 9/11, it was really difficult in school. I had a really good friend of mine. She was Arab, and once all the information came out of the woodwork about how so-and-so was behind 9/11 and how they were from a certain country, she started to become the butt of all jokes. She was teased, she was taunted. They would say that her uncle was behind the Twin Towers and behind so many people dying.
I think it's a very dangerous misperception among Americans that Muslim beliefs are so fundamentally different from Judeo-Christian that they can't be bridged, and that there isn't possible a reconciliation or an intermingling of the views. What things like the Gallup poll do is restore the balance, is they allow people to understand just how isolated and how extreme many of these voices are, and they don't actually represent what the vast majority of people in the Muslim world actually believe and actually aspire to.
The 9/11 attacks really shocked the United States, and because the terrorists spoke in the vocabulary of faith and Islam, they were assessed in that context. People looked at them as Muslim terrorists, or they talked about Islamic terror, or they talked about Islam. And generally speaking, because of the broad lack of knowledge about Muslims and Islam in the United States, an act of terror by a small group of, literally a couple of dozen guys, was conflated with the whole Islamic religion in a way that Timothy McVeigh was not conflated with Christianity in the United States, or that some of the Jewish terrorists who had killed people in Palestine, like the attack on the Hebron Mosque, was not conflated with all of Judaism.
Muslims don't feel like they have to separate themselves from terrorists who are committing acts of terrorism in the name of their faith any more than any white Christian might feel like they need to separate themselves from the Ku Klux Klan, who in fact is the oldest terrorist organization in the world and commits all their acts of violence and hate in the name of Christianity, even to the point of having a giant cross as one of their symbols. What we find is that the majority of Muslims not only are not involved themselves in violence, but in fact condemn even those few who are. And when they condemn those violent few, they are doing it many times in the name of their faith. They are against the terrorists because terrorism, they believe, is against their faith. And what that leads us to believe is that perhaps it's Islam that will ultimately have the power to destroy Al-Qaeda.
This brewing isolationism here at home is not going to serve us well in the globalized world of the 21st century. And we've got to resist what is a very understandable inclination to say, let's forget about their problems, let's concentrate on our own. Because the simple fact of the matter is, the one lesson that we should have learned from September 11th is that their problems are our problems.